The Blood Ravens are a loyalist space marine chapter of unknown genetic origin and founding. The origins of the Blood Ravens are shrouded in mystery and are believed to be tied to a dark truth related to the Horus heresy. This elusive chapter has always been drawn to the pursuit of knowledge and the acquisition of ancient lore. It produces an unusually large number of librarians among its ranks, as a high proportion of neophytes develop psychic abilities soon after their implantation with the Blood Raven's gene seed organs. The powerful Blood Raven's librarians guide the chapter, enabling them to fight with a precision and calculated fury made possible by their ability to predict and thwart their enemies' strategies and tactics before they come to pass. These arcane powers have led to great speculation and some worry about the true nature and origins of this chapter in the rest of the Imperium. As much as they are known for their bravery and combat efficiency, the Blood Ravens chapter is also renowned for its obsession with recovering lost information and technology. These battle brothers have repeatedly shown a willingness to accept non-traditional techniques and extreme approaches so that some lost relic or tome could be recovered and secured within their vaults. Their tendency to rely heavily upon a higher than normal number of psychically talented space marines only serves to further differentiate the Blood Ravens from most other chapters. Some members of the Adeptus Administratum believe that this reliance upon their psychers is a potential disaster, while others respect and fear the advantages these talented battle brothers have repeatedly provided to their chapter. The Blood Ravens are now a fleet-based chapter following the loss of their original home planet at Aurelia. Their own records have been expunged, and the ones kept by the Ordo Malleus concerning the chapter are sealed. Perhaps because of this, the Blood Ravens hunger for knowledge and are particularly obsessive about discovering the truth behind their creation. After being cut off from the Imperium at large by the birth of the Great Rift in the era Indomitus, the Blood Ravens were delivered the gene seed to make their own Primaris Space Marines by Shield Captain Apollos Pertinax of the Adeptus Custodes and a torchbearer fleet. The decimation that the Blood Ravens endured as a chapter while being cut off from reinforcement and aid necessitated a rapid induction of these new transhuman progeny. The chapter's apothecaries and librarians have researched their Primaris gene seed extensively for any clues as to the Blood Raven's unknown genetic origins. What they have discovered remains unknown to outsiders. Though the Blood Ravens have a long and glorious history of service to the Emperor, their exact origins and earliest days in the service of the Imperium are obscured and uncertain. Not even their chapter master or librarians can say with any certainty when the Blood Ravens were founded or from which of the first founding Space Marine legions the chapter is descended. The chapter's written records in its Librarius only go back to the 37th millennium, though vague references of their service in the litanies of other chapters and Imperial Adepta prove that they existed and fought the enemies of the Emperor for many centuries before then. However, the records mentioned are either missing or locked away under an inquisitorial seal. The gaps in the Imperial records concerning their origins are so extensive that the chapter does not even know the origins of its gene seed or the identity of their Primarch. The fact that the Blood Raven's own records and chapter lore are lost along with those kept by the Inquisition on the chapter is a suspicious indicator that suggests that a concerted effort was made by operatives within many Imperial Adepta, including the Inquisition and the Blood Ravens themselves, to eliminate almost all trace of the Blood Raven's past from Imperial records. Why this erasure was carried out remains unknown, but the event is known as the Unfounding by the Blood Ravens. What is odder still is that records on the Blood Ravens were discovered on Eldari knowledge worlds hidden in the Eye of Terror and guarded by the enigmatic Harlequins. Since the Blood Ravens prize the pursuit of knowledge greatly, it is ironic that the Astartes of this chapter know so little about their own origins or the earliest centuries of their service to the Emperor of mankind. At some point in the chapter's history during their early campaigns in the Gothic sector, They took immense casualties in combat with the forces of chaos, though no corroborating records exist to confirm this conflict occurred. It is told in the chapter that in the early days of that campaign, the foul servants of chaos were widespread and disorganized, with no hope of standing before the Blood Raven's might. But the machinations of chaos are manifold, and this impression proved to be horrifyingly false. The forces of the local chaos cults were far more organized than they at first appeared, and the centers of cult activity attacked by the Blood Ravens were discovered to be fiendishly cunning traps. Many Blood Ravens were lost in these elaborate ambushes, and in a blow that could have proven fatal to the young chapter, the chapter master and the master of sanctity both fell defending the retreat of the remnants of the first company. With heavy casualties and no strong replacements among the chapter's officers to replace their leader, the chief librarian Azariah Vidya stepped forth and took command of the chapter, becoming the first in the Blood Ravens to hold the dual mantle of chapter master and chief librarian, an arrangement that would soon become a tradition for the Blood Ravens. Known by his battle brothers as the Great Father or the Father Librarian, Azariah Vidya used his psychic power and traditional methods of intelligence to learn his enemies' habits in minute detail and then launch devastating attacks against their greatest vulnerabilities. A highly intelligent warrior, Vidya knew much of history and bore the burden of terrible knowledge of the ruinous powers. He was also blessed, although some might say cursed, with tremendously powerful psychic powers. He spent solar months studying the enemy's movements, tactics, and even their histories in an attempt to discern how they might be defeated. While keeping up the facade that the Blood Ravens were reeling from the previous attacks, he utilized his warriors and those of the Astra Militarum to probe the enemy to see how they reacted, gauging their response. To some of the Blood Ravens as well as Imperial High Command, it appeared that he wasted his time, that retreating to books rather than steel and courage was no way to fight the enemies of the Emperor. Eventually, Vidya completed his divinations and studies, declaring that he possessed the knowledge to defeat the enemy utterly. The Blood Ravens launched a sweeping counteroffensive that at first seemed to be organized in a confusing and uninformed way, striking areas that were virtually devoid of enemy activity. Each move proved to foreshadow the forces of Chaos's movements, however, denying them strategic ground, sources of resupply, and later routes of retreat. When the Blood Ravens launched their primary assaults, they hit the Chaos forces at their weakest points with a supernatural prescience, smashing their resistance aside with ease. Feated with honors, Vidya insisted that the key lay in researching and dissecting the enemy's movements. But some Blood Ravens, and indeed some of those outsiders aware of the story, believed that the powerful Psyker was reading the enemy's minds and gleaning the necessary information he needed to defeat them in that way. After the crushing blow of the first offensive, the rest of the Gothic sector campaign was short and extremely bloody, with the enemy forces melting before the Blood Ravens' relentless assaults. At the conclusion of the rebellion, inquisitorial Pragadis teams discovered dark writings and abominable idols that pointed to the involvement of the traitorous Alpha Legion, a fact that the Inquisition noted did not surprise Vidya when he was informed. After the resounding victory in the Gothic sector, legends tell of how Vidya took the chapter away to heal its wounds, mourn its dead, and reflect on the battles it had just fought. At the insistence of his battle brothers and the secret masters, noteworthy and well-regarded warriors within the chapter, Vidya took on the dual mantle of chapter master and chief librarian, an uncommon but not totally unknown occurrence within the Blood Ravens, and one that was frowned upon by other Space Marine chapters who believed in a strict adherence to the command hierarchy prescribed in the Codex Astartes. Vidya served in this dual role for several standard centuries, and his heroic deeds are told in great prayers committed to the hearts and minds of every single Blood Raven from the time they joined the chapter as aspirants. Azariah Vidya led the rebuilding of the chapter, and the current organization of the Blood Ravens has been influenced strongly by the teachings of the Great Father. Following his example, the Blood Ravens will study their adversaries closely before launching precise attacks at key points. The chapter also has one more distinct trait. It gathers and guards knowledge with great zeal. This is a tendency of the chapter that catches the attention of some individuals in the Imperium, and it is a cultural quirk that is not necessarily considered a good thing amongst the higher levels of the Imperial Adepta and the Inquisition. There is little information available, even among the chapter's legends, concerning its leadership prior to the Great Father assuming the mantle of Chapter Master. Many scholars among the Adeptus Administratum believe that it was his legendary role as both Chief Librarian and Chapter Master that has led the Blood Ravens to value librarians so highly amongst their battle brothers. Some Imperial scholars even go so far as to suggest that Blood Ravens aspirants with these traits are deliberately sought out, as one might represent a true heir to Vidya's legend. Others argue that he may simply have set certain traditions in motion so that the chapter will always be able to rely upon a stalwart contingent of psychically gifted members. A tome allegedly penned by Azariah Vidya himself, called the Apocrypha of the Unfounding, postulates that the Blood Ravens are a chapter dear to the soul of the Emperor himself, and that their history was hidden by agents close to the throne to keep them secret from the Emperor's other sons, but not from the Blood Ravens themselves. The Apocrypha argues that searching for these lost answers is not heretical as long as the knowledge is kept within the chapter itself. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Blood Raven is the unusually high concentration of powerful librarians within their chapter. The Blood Ravens chapter possesses far more psychers than is common among other Astartes, and most of them develop their abilities only after they are planted with the Blood Raven's gene seed organs. It is unknown if this is due to the nature of the chapter's gene seed, but it is not an uncommon thought among the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus that there may be some chaos taint within the Blood Raven's gene seed. It is said in hushed tones among the Blood Ravens that there is a special squad made up of only librarians that work secretly within the chapter. The librarians of the Blood Ravens are exceptionally powerful within the chapter's ranks, but whether this is due to the actions of the Great Father or is simply a result of the reverence the Blood Ravens hold him in is unknown. For millennia, the Blood Ravens have been largely identified by their obsession with uncovering secrets and their use of psychers as a crucial aspect of their martial prowess. Many of these studies push the boundaries of imperial tenets, often drawing the attention of inquisitorial elements. The Blood Ravens have consistently exhibited a clear willingness to study their foes prior to eliminating them. However, such knowledge can lead to tragic corruption, as in some cases, mere knowledge can be irrevocably damning. Such has proven to be the case in the story of the recently defeated Blood Ravens renegade Azariah Kyras. Before that traitor rose to the position of Blood Ravens chapter master, he fought a valiant battle against the greater demon of Nurgle named Ulker on the world of Aurelia. While the hideous warp spawn was overcome, then epistolary Kyras was thought lost to the warp. His death was entered into the chapter's records, along with commendations for bravery, until 500 Terran years later, when he inexplicably returned and seized command of the Fifth Company. His experiences within the warp tragically corrupted the librarian, such that upon his return, he became intently focused on spreading that chaos corruption to his battle brothers. Over the centuries that followed, Azariah Kyras hid his corruption while spreading his taint through the chapter. Those who fell under his sway became hosts for demons allied with the, supposedly dead, greater demon Ulker. In surprisingly short order, Kyras assumed the title of chapter master as well as chief librarian, taking command of the Blood Ravens and corrupting many other space marines. At the same time, he forged alliances with other demons and foul servants of chaos. Gabriel Angelus, captain of the Third Company, was the only member of the chapter's command elements to view Kyras's return with mistrust. Gabriel quietly and suspiciously investigated the chapter master at every opportunity, ultimately exposing the chapter master as a heretic and traitor when he confirmed links between the fallen battle brother and the traitor legions. However, the truth was discovered too late. By the time Captain Angelus was prepared to reveal his findings to the chapter, a large number of its space marines were already corrupted. Instead, Kyras declared Gabriel a traitor and initiated a vicious hunt for the valiant officer and his loyal forces. A bloody chapter civil war ensued, one that engulfed the entire Aurelian subsector at its peak in the last years of the 41st millennium. Kyras eventually openly declared his loyalty to Chaos and ascended to demonhood. The newborn demon prince was slain, but at a great cost to Gabriel's forces. Gabriel ascended to become the new chapter master after a bloody purge, and many of the chapter's unusual practices continue to be re-examined. The chapter now must exhibit great care as it recruits new members to replace those who betrayed the Imperium, lest other factions push for their dissolution at this time of weakness. Before the Imperium was torn asunder by the birth of the Great Rift and racked by the Noctis Eterna that marked the dawn of the era Indomitus, the Blood Ravens were still reeling from the horrendous casualties and internal strife suffered during the Acheron campaign, the 3 Aurelian Crusades, and the Kalrava campaign. With the chapter barely at half strength in the wake of these conflicts, Gabriel Angelus ordered a regrouping and rearming in subsector Aurelia, and the bulk of the Blood Ravens were able to return. The chapter master decreed that this consolidation was to be conducted alongside large-scale recruitment. Blood trials to find new aspirants were carried out on every world from which the Blood Ravens recruited, and they were held more frequently. Production of arms, starships, and other war material increased. Angelus declared that once enough of the chapter had been rebuilt, the Blood Ravens would strike out into the galaxy anew and bring bolter and blade to the Emperor's foes with renewed vigor. But this grand rebuilding was not to be. Scant solar weeks after initiating his plans, madness erupted in the sky as the Cicatrix Maledictum emerged, and the Astronomicon dimmed and flickered out. Contact between the Blood Ravens detachments conducting blood trials and the chapter's flagship Omnis Arcanum became next to impossible. Ships full of aspirants were lost to the warp. All over subsector Aurelia, outbreaks of mutation and other psychic phenomena were endemic. Some Blood Ravens, psychically sensitive as many are, perished or were driven to madness by the surge in empiric energy. Those librarians able to make some sense of the distortion reported terrible visions and nightmares, some even of the great unclean one Ulkyr stirring in his prison in the core of old Aurelia. Entire astropathic choirs died horrendous deaths as uncontrollable forces built up inside them to the point that their heads literally exploded under the expanding pressure. Despite all of this, enough psychic infrastructure remained intact for scores of desperate messages to reach the core of the Blood Ravens fleet, each begging for the chapter's aid as worlds across the length, breadth, and depth of subsector Aurelia found themselves beset by demonic onslaughts, mass outbursts of mutation, and rising heretical xenophile and chaos cults. Gabriel Angelus, ever a warrior of honor, nobility, and an uncompromising stubbornness in the face of the enemy, ordered his Blood Ravens to respond to as many worlds as possible within the region. Due to the loss of the Astronomicon's beacon, carrying out such commands was much easier said than done, but the Blood Ravens persevered, rushing as quickly as they could to their allies' aid using short, arduous warp jumps. Throughout this time, Angelus had his astropaths endeavor to send messages across the Great Rift, what the Blood Ravens called the Tier, to what they would later know to be the Imperium Sanctus. Several ships were also dispatched across the Great Rift. None of the attempts were successful and countless brave lives were lost. It was only when elements of the Adeptus Custodes Emissaries Imperatus located the Blood Ravens 7th Company, under the command of Captain Atanaxis, that the chapter regained any contact with the wider Imperium. In a tense meeting, the Custodes stated that Primarch Robut Guilliman had returned to lead the Imperium in its darkest hour as its Lord Commander and Imperial Regent. They also explained that what they called Primaris Space Marines were fighting for the Imperium in the tens of thousands. bringing with them supplies of the Blood Raven's own gene seed sourced from the vaults of Mars themselves and modified by the tech priests of Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call. The Custodes presented Adanaxis with a gift from the Emperor, the means to develop Primaris space marines of their own. Eager to learn what this might mean and what knowledge of the chapter's origins they could yield from this, Captain Adanaxis accepted, though what real choice he had in the matter is debatable. Many Terran years later, with the Indomitus crusade in full swing and its fleets rushing to the aid of beleaguered star systems across the galaxy, hundreds of Primaris space marines clad in Blood Raven's colors now wage war in the Emperor's name. Armed with all the new panoply of war created by Belisarius Call, they bring death to their enemies across subsector Aurelia and beyond, their forces combating the malignant hordes of the archenemy wherever they find them, be they clawing their way out of the storm of the Emperor's wrath or laying siege to the Somnium stars. Using their talents for research, the Blood Raven's apothecaries and librarians applied every kind of scrutiny known to them to the new gene seed and Primaris creation technology provided for them by the Adeptus Mechanicus. What they might have discovered is naught but suspicion and conjecture to any outside the chapter who know of the Blood Raven's deep desire to seek out knowledge of their origins. The Secret Masters in particular have made a point of ensuring that the knowledge they have gleaned remains secret, going to great lengths to secure it against any eyes that might pry where they are welcome. The Blood Ravens identify themselves as a chapter that stays closely within the criteria demanded by the Codex Astartes. By the standards of someone who has little interaction with other Space Marines, this is a reasonably accurate description. However, compared to many of the more conservative chapters, particularly the successor chapters of the Ultramarines and Imperial Fists legions, the Blood Ravens exhibit a significant level of variation from the standard procedures as dictated by the Codex. While the Blood Ravens follow the Codex Astartes in spirit, if not letter, their passion for knowledge was instilled into the chapter through the Great Father Azariah Vidya's example. As a result, the Blood Ravens maintain one of the most extensive, well-organized, and detailed archives ever seen in a Space Marine chapter, rivaling even the ancient records of many of the first founding chapters. Librarians carefully studying the chapter's records in an attempt to find hints as to the chapter's deeper origins have found anomalous data and even strange gaps on occasion. Those brave or foolhardy enough to do so whisper that perhaps Azariah Vidya himself may have had a hand in removing the relevant records, though none have the evidence to demonstrate such an allegation. The Blood Ravens' basic company organization is consistent with the directives of the Codex. The Blood Ravens maintain 10 standard companies. Each of these companies maintains the status, combat specializations, and training protocols as dictated per the Codex. This is in spite of the fact that the chapter is fleet-based, so companies may be forced to separate due to extended assignments aboard vessels directed to separate portions of the Imperium. The most sweeping change within the Blood Ravens company leadership is that all company commanders take a member of the Librarians on as a trusted advisor who aids in preparation for all battles. In some instances, these librarians even go on to assume the title of company commander in the event of battlefield losses. The Blood Ravens chapter is known for having a much higher number of librarians than most chapters. It is not uncommon for multiple librarians to be attached to companies, librarians to be in charge of outposts and starships, and even companies when necessary, such as Librarian Captain Lucius, the former captain of the 5th Company. The veteran 1st Company of the Blood Ravens includes several squads made up entirely of librarians, which are dispatched on only the most important missions, though what these may be is unknown. The chapter master of the Blood Ravens also traditionally holds the dual role and offices of chapter master and chief librarian, a tradition dating back to when the Great Father Azariah Vidya was the first to do so. Whatever the reason for such a large number of librarians in the ranks of the Blood Ravens, they are an integral part of the chapter. For instance, the 9th Company had no less than 4 librarians attached to it, though with the recent deaths of brothers Beryld and Rama, that number dropped to 2. Other librarians of note in the chapter are Isidore Achios, the former librarian of the Third Company before he turned traitor and was slain by Gabriel Angelus, Father Jonas, who was previously stationed on the chapter's recruiting world of Rahe's Paradise, and the two other Ninth Company librarians, Japel and Corinth. After the Third Aurelian Crusade and the death of the corrupted Azariah Kyras, Captain Gabriel Angelus ascended to become the new and present chapter master of the Blood Ravens, following a bloody purge of the chaos-corrupted Blood Ravens who remained. Under Angelus's leadership, many of the chapter's unusual practices continue to be re-examined. Since the ascension of Gabriel Angelus, the Blood Ravens have become intensely focused on the identification and elimination of the traitor legions and those allied with the entities of the Warp. In several instances, Imperial pleas for assistance with other threats have gone unanswered, so that the Blood Ravens could continue to pursue their own agenda against chaos. It is too early to tell if this is a long-term change in the chapter's outlook or simply a shorter-term strategy necessitated by extraordinary circumstances. As a fleet-based chapter, the Blood Ravens recruit from many different worlds, and recruitment, training, and implantation of gene seed organs in aspirants can be done by nearly every capital ship in the Blood Ravens fleet. The reserve of the chapter's gene seed is spread throughout all of its primary starships, stored in the implantation chambers aboard each vessel. These chambers are the most protected on any Blood Raven starship and will be defended by the Blood Ravens with their lives if need be, for these chambers contain the essence of the chapter's future. The chapter is based out of the battle barge Omnis Arcanum that serves as the mobile fortress monastery of the chapter. It is from the Omnis Arcanum that the Blood Ravens chapter master directs the efforts of the chapter's companies, and where the great Librarium Sanctorium of the chapter stores all the knowledge gathered by the chapter in the pursuit of its duties. Like many of the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, the Blood Ravens maintain an honor guard for the chapter master. The honor guard under Azariah Kyras was led by Captain Apollo Diomedes, the physical embodiment of the chapter master's will, who would go on to become a chaplain following the death of the traitor chapter master. The Blood Ravens have suffered heavy losses in recent times during the Tartarus campaign, the Dark Crusade, the Kaurava campaign, the first two Aurelian Crusades, and the Inquisition's recent purge of the Aurelian subsector, all of which has led to the loss of a number of the chapter's recruiting worlds. It will take some time to rebuild the chapter's numbers from such losses, and with every recruiting world that has been ravaged, the Blood Raven's future prospects have become that much darker. However, the recent introduction of Primaris Space Marine reinforcements from the Ultima founding has gone a long way in making good the chapter's losses as they prepare to begin the creation of their own Primaris Battle Brothers. Like their fellow Adeptus Astartes chapters, the Blood Ravens also maintain a librarium of potent psychers who are highly talented and trained to master the power of the warp at the highest levels. Each chapter selects its librarians in its own way, either from seed worlds, as it does with the bulk of its initiates, or from the ranks of gifted adolescent male psychers brought to the Scholastica Psychina of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica by the black ships of the Great Tithe. The librarians of the chapter also fulfill a number of more secretive and specialized roles, including stewardship of the Great Librarium aboard the battle barge Omnis Arcanum, and the secret orders of Psychana, who maintain the Sanctorium Arcanum aboard it. The Omnis Arcanum serves as the Blood Raven's mobile fortress monastery, as it is the largest battle barge within the chapter's fleet. The chapter's Librarium Sanctorum, the majority of which is kept aboard the Omnis Arcanum, contains countless scrolls, tomes, electronic storage devices, and computational engines that store the chapter's records, roll of honor, and the ancient, and often forbidden, lore that they have recovered during their ongoing research. The path to becoming a space marine is long, arduous, and fraught with peril, but it is a more straightforward path to tread when compared to the hardships an aspirant must endure to become a librarian. Deadly trials and terrifying ordeals that test an aspirant's strength of will, character, and psychic resilience are necessarily harsh to ensure that the potential librarian has the power to resist the predations of warp creatures and etheric entities that inhabit the haunted depths of the Empyrean. Those who fail in such endeavors usually either die in agony during the testing or are swiftly executed as potential conduits for possession by warp entities. But there are others who fail in their testing, but are so ravaged by it that they are no longer sane or, in some cases, even humanoid in form anymore. These poor, unfortunate individuals are taken in pentagrammically warded chains to a shuttered, lonely place on the Omnis Arcanum known simply as the Tower, where they are studied by the chapter's librarians to better understand what makes an aspirant fail to join the librarium and how they might better hone and prepare the minds of others who take the trials. The Tower is a horrifying place, echoing to the sounds of lunatic screams and shunned by all, save those who must brave the soul-destroying terror of those condemned to this place. What happens behind the locked and warded doors of the Tower is never spoken of, but there are dark tales of beasts conjured from beyond the veil and briefly allowed to manifest in the flesh of those incarcerated within the Tower before being banished back to the warp. The veracity of such tales is suspect, to say the least, but were they proven true, they could potentially be the chapter's undoing. Early in their history, the Bloodravens maintained their fortress monastery at Selenon, within view of the hive city of the same name on the hive world of Aurelia, in the subsector Aurelia of the Segmentum Ultima's Corianis sector. It was a technologically advanced and profitable world that served as the economic heart of the region and the proud namesake of the entire subsector. In the late 40th millennium, however, a warp storm suddenly engulfed the planet, summoned by the great unclean one Ulcair in his battle against the Bloodravens. The Bloodravens, then Chapter Master Moriah and Librarian Azariah Kyras, sealed the greater demon of Nurgle within the heart of the planet, but the damage was done. Aurelia disappeared into the warp and remained there for almost a standard millennium, transformed into a perpetually shifting ice world devoid of all life save for demons and other warp entities. With the loss of Aurelia, the Bloodravens were transformed into a fleet-based chapter who recruited their aspirants from the other populated worlds in the Aurelian subsector. As a fleet-based chapter, the Bloodravens now have no official homeworld. Instead, their fortress monastery is situated on board the massive battle barge Omnis Arcanum, which is also home to their precious Librarium Sanctorum. The rest of the chapter serves aboard the unusually large fleet of strike cruisers and other battle barges that were assigned to the Bloodravens long ago when the chapter was founded. Most of the Bloodravens' neophytes come from the major worlds of the subsector Aurelia, including the desert feudal world of Calderis, the jungle feral world of Typhon, and the nearby hive world of Meridian. But none of the recruits from Meridian had passed the blood trials to become Bloodravens neophytes in several standard centuries. Thaddeus is the first Bloodraven Astartes to come from Meridian in several centuries, having been recruited from the Hiver Street gangs he led there by Captain Davian Thule. It is repeatedly said that the loss of Calderis would cripple and eventually kill the Bloodravens chapter, as they had no other way to recruit neophytes, and the defense of subsector Aurelia from the Tyrannid Splinter Hive fleet was considered important enough to mobilize both the Bloodravens' 3rd and 4th companies. The 3rd company of the Bloodravens commonly sought aspirants from the planet of Cyrene, also in subsector Aurelia. Until then, Captain Gabriel Angelus had it destroyed with an Exterminatus order. The taint of chaos had been found in the planet's population, a taint so terrible that only Exterminatus could prevent the contagion from spreading to other imperial worlds in the region. Aurelia made an ominous return to real space in the 41st millennium, 1,000 Terran years after it was lost. This reemergence was orchestrated by the Black Legion, and it was only by the heroics of the 3rd and 5th companies that their plans to devastate subsector Aurelia were thwarted. What was left of Aurelia remains in real space to this day, and is heavily monitored by both the Blood Ravens and the Inquisition, and is garrisoned by regiments of the Astra Militarum. While the Blood Ravens now have no fixed base of operations, the other worlds of the Aurelia subsector continue to provide the majority of the chapter's recruits and much of its war gear. There are a number of worlds in particular that the Blood Ravens favor over others. Why this should be the case is not fully understood, but it is speculated by some that these worlds have a higher incidence of psychers than normal. Though such speculation is not fully substantiated, the chapter's prevalence of librarians lends such ideas credence. The Blood Ravens, like many fleet-based chapters, recruit from a number of different worlds. However, the class of worlds they recruit from is not limited, and they draw initiates from feral worlds and hive worlds alike. The only similarity between the worlds is the higher volume of psychers they are home to, leading to an increased number of librarians in the chapter. However, recent events have seen the Blood Ravens lose many of these recruiting worlds. The Blood Ravens have an interesting relationship with the Inquisition. Blood Ravens librarians can be found in the Death Watch, and the chapter appears to also maintain unusually close relations with the Grey Knights of the Ordo Malleus, whose existence they are aware of. It would appear that the Grey Knights, psychers all, feel an affinity for the Blood Ravens and trust the chapter with the knowledge of their existence, a rare sign of trust. The Grey Knights attached a task force to assist the Blood Ravens during the Dark Crusade on the world of Cronus for reasons unknown. It is interesting to note that the Grey Knights worked closely with the Blood Ravens and not with the other Imperial forces on the planet, and indeed the Blood Ravens came into conflict at that time with the forces of the Astra Militarum due to the unflinching and conflicting orders of Governor Militant Lucas Alexander and Captain Davian Thule. It should be noted that following the first two Aurelian Crusades, the Blood Ravens' home subsector Aurelia came under an increasingly powerful assault by the forces of Chaos and a splinter of the Tyrannid Hive Fleet Leviathan. With increasing evidence that large portions of the Blood Ravens chapter had been corrupted by Chaos, the Ordo Hereticus of the Inquisition commandeered several regiments of the Astra Militarum under the command of the Inquisitor Adrastia and sought to launch an exterminatus campaign against all the inhabited worlds in the Aurelian subsector. As a result of the heroics of Captain Gabriel Angelus and those Blood Ravens who remained loyal to the Emperor, the taint of chaos upon the chapter was purged, and much of the subsector was saved from destruction. However, a deep and lingering suspicion still remains between the Blood Ravens and the Inquisition, and the Ordo Hereticus will continue to cast a wary eye upon the Blood Ravens and their new chapter master, Gabriel Angelus, for a long time to come. The Blood Ravens believe by studying one's enemy, one can predict their movements before launching any attacks, rather than charging in like an uncontrolled berserker or using spontaneous lightning assaults. This has caused friction with other, more headstrong chapters. Those who prefer a clear-cut approach to battle have branded the Blood Ravens as cowards for their overly methodical approach to waging warfare. But this is an unfair assessment, for once the Blood Ravens take to the field, they fight with righteous fury and a zeal the equal of any other chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. Once decided upon, the chapter never deviates from the chosen strategy, from its initial planning stages to its final execution, executing it with ruthless efficiency. The thoroughness of their planning is such that every eventuality is accounted for, thanks to their librarians' powerful divinations. Their uncanny abilities to predict enemy attacks or invasions has helped them warn or respond well before other Imperial organizations have even been made aware of the threat. More puritanical figures within the Inquisition have whispered in dark tones of the sad tale of the Thousand Sons Legion and their fallen Primarch Magnus the Red and his ultimate fate. A path trod to damnation that began with the abilities to predict such dire events, much like the Blood Ravens. In preparation for combat, members of the Blood Ravens invariably begin with intense study of their opponents and their tactics. All forms of reconnaissance and any relevant historical or psychological resources are fully utilized in the course of this exhausting research. Only once all reasonable means have been undertaken to compile data is this information thoroughly analyzed. The analysis process may take solar days or even weeks, depending upon the reliability of the information acquired and the prior experience that the various battle brothers might have with their opponents. Finally, once a thorough analysis has been compiled, only then is a tactical solution to the issue devised. Invariably, during the course of this analysis and planning, command officers rely heavily upon the input and advice of any librarians available. These talented psychers are expected to use their talents to also plumb the depths of the warp for additional information upon their foes and to conduct any divinations that might be appropriate. Among the Blood Ravens, these skills are every bit as crucial for a librarian as the more forceful talents of the battle psyker that are applied during a direct physical conflict. With a thoroughly compiled plan in hand, the Force Commander presents it to the Space Marines participating in the mission. Generally, these plans contain a myriad of alternative plans that account for an immense number of outcomes, often going into explicit and excruciating detail. Once these plans have been reviewed and accepted by the Battle Brothers, they are very seldom changed. Through the course of a given battle, the Blood Ravens almost always adhere rigidly to their plans. This is in part due to the fact that the agonizing level of detail permits the plans to accommodate a variety of different outcomes. However, it is more often due to the fact that the insight of their talented librarians almost always provides accurate data such that the final plan is appropriate and consistent with the conditions encountered on the field of battle. At times, the Blood Ravens willingly make deviations from standard Codex Astartes directives when creating their complex strategies. In those circumstances where they have additional information or an unusual piece of war gear, they make such items a cornerstone of their plans. In this way, the chapter maintains the belief that they follow the philosophy and general directives of the Codex Astartes without being constrained by the fact that the text is 10,000 standard years in age. For though these battle brothers believe that their secrets must be carefully preserved, they also believe that their resources must be appropriately exploited in order to overcome their foes with a minimum of risk. The Blood Ravens have a deep belief in the Emperor, perhaps because they do not know who their Primarch is, which leads them to give praise to the Emperor with a fervor greater than almost any other chapter. Like most Astartes, they venerate him not as a god, but as the mightiest of men, a belief that oftentimes brings them into conflict with the ecclesiarchy. A common battle cry of the chapter is, "For the unknown Primarch and the Emperor." The Blood Ravens venerate knowledge and constantly seek it out and guard it. Their motto is, "Knowledge is power, guard it well," a maxim held firmly by all the chapter's librarians and central to the core beliefs of the chapter. As their quest for knowledge echoes many tenets of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the chapter also maintains unusually close ties with the priesthood of Mars. Oftentimes, the Blood Ravens will join forces with Mechanicus explorator fleets in their search for archaeotech and lost knowledge in the unknown quarters of the galaxy. The Blood Ravens are often known to seek out sites of lost artifacts, fabled writings, and ancient relics to deny them and the secrets they hold to the archenemy. To achieve this, they rely heavily on their librarians, both to lead the continuing search for new additions to their holdings and to keep the secret archives in order and compile new records. The Blood Ravens believe that information is the greatest weapon available to them in the fight against the Emperor's enemies. The Blood Ravens are a proud and secretive chapter, obsessed with ritual, history, and the acquisition of knowledge, most especially for the truth of their beginnings. This gap in the Blood Ravens' history has led to endless speculation as to the exact origin of the chapter and what could have happened to expunge such a large and important portion of their history from their lore. It is this focus that has driven their ongoing quest to discover more information of all kinds. This quest has unquestionably subjected Blood Ravens' battle brothers to an increased exposure to heretical knowledge. Some from outside the chapter question the wisdom of their pursuits when they could safely embrace the security of ignorance. Because of the many facets of their investigations, the Blood Ravens have often worked closely with members of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Through the millennia, these Space Marines have uncovered many examples of archaeotech, which they have almost always provided to the followers of the Omnissiah without question. At times, the Cult Mechanicus has repaid them for their generosity with gifts of additional war gear, which is well suited to advancing their cause. There is no formal relationship, as some viewed as an insult to more needy chapters. However, this appears to represent an understanding based upon enlightened self-interest. The Blood Ravens are likely to take full advantage of these additional resources as they continue to rebuild after the losses they suffered during their recent internal strife. The Blood Ravens' battle cry is, "Knowledge is power, guard it well." This is more than just a chant to bellow as they charge forth to slay the Imperium's foes. It is a mantra by which the chapter's battle brothers live. They firmly believe that information is the key to solving countless problems and a weapon that can be exploited by the Imperium or by its enemies. These 2 points explain the care that these Space Marines exhibit prior to entering into combat and the security that they use to keep their own information and tools isolated from even their allies. It is not uncommon for groups of librarians to be dispatched with an army of servitors and a number of Space Marine squads to uncover a lost artifact whose location has been recently unearthed or revealed through ritual divination. This has brought the Blood Ravens into direct conflict with the Inquisition on several occasions, as many of the items they seek are touched by the ruinous powers. The Blood Ravens insist that it is their duty to hunt down and oppose the forces of chaos wherever they may be, and that by recovering and destroying the tools of chaos, they deny the archenemy their use. However, the Blood Ravens have been less than forthcoming regarding any proof of the destruction of any of the hundreds of chaos artifacts they are said to have procured. Such actions do nothing to allay their critics. When dark rumors about the Blood Ravens began to circulate in the aftermath of the Third Aurelian Crusade, Inquisitors from both the Ordo Malleus and Ordo Hereticus headed for Subsector Aurelia, determined to discover the truth. Alas for them, their expeditions coincided with the emergence of the Great Rift. They have not been heard of since and are presumed dead, lost in the deadly tangle of warp storms that has cut the galaxy in two in the era Indomitus. The ancient chapter master and chief librarian, Azariah Vidya, is the single space marine most revered by the Blood Ravens. While he is not believed to have been active at the time of the chapter's founding, he is credited with the formation of their many traditions. While a normal space marine, the Blood Ravens refer to him as the Great Father, a term that other chapters might use to identify their Primarch or even the Emperor. Such a degree of idolatry expressed towards a fellow battle brother is certainly uncommon, but seems to fulfill the void in the chapter's iconography due to the lack of knowledge of their genetic origins and the identity of their Primarch. Their views towards the Emperor are in keeping with the most common Space Marine beliefs. The Blood Ravens deeply respect the Emperor as their creator and leader, but they do not follow the teachings of the Imperial cult and do not believe that the Emperor is divine. There is little information available, even among the chapter's legends, concerning its leadership prior to the Great Father assuming the mantle of Chapter Master. Many scholars among the Adeptus Administratum believe that it was his legendary role as both Chief Librarian and Chapter Master that has led the Blood Ravens to value librarians so highly among their battle brothers. Since Chapter Master Gabriel Angelus has taken command of the Blood Ravens, they have renewed their devotion to combating and overcoming the ways of chaos. This is in large part due to the extensive heresy that he uncovered within the chapter, and may be a consequence of the corruption that he found on his homeworld of Cyrene. Under his direction, all of the chapter's traditions regarding the warp are currently being scrutinized. Its leadership is now well aware that the Blood Ravens can ill afford to lose any further members to treason or heresy. The Blood Ravens' greatest mystery concerns the history and reasons behind their founding. A large part of the chapter's ongoing quest to recover lost information is in the fervent hopes of discovering their origins. Because of their unusually high number of battle brothers who possess psychic talents, The Adeptus Mechanicus has tested their gene seed for mutation or chaos contamination at a substantially more frequent interval than that normally required. Even through the course of these countless investigations, the Blood Raven's gene seed has consistently shown a high level of stability and purity. At the same time, it is unusual that it shows no consistent traits that could be used to link it to the genetic lineage of any of the Primarchs. Thus far, there has been little evidence of mutation, and nothing that points to their gene seed as the source of the Blood Raven's disproportionate number of psychers or the unusual potency of the psychic powers they exhibit. There has been much speculation regarding which of the first founding Space Marine legions the Blood Raven's gene seed is derived from. Both the Blood Angels and Raven Guard have been suggested, but these are likely to be based on nothing more than the similarity of names between the chapters. Other persistent rumors say that the Blood Ravens may have derived their genetic stock from the Dark Angel's gene seed, but no definitive facts have ever been presented to establish the true source of the chapter's genetic material. The lack of records pertaining to whom they descended from implies that they were created in anticipation of a specific purpose, to counter some threat to the Imperium in centuries past that has since been dealt with and defeated, or from a source that was considered so shameful that all records of the connection between the Blood Ravens and their progenitors had to be hidden from future generations. The truth of their origins is sought above all other knowledge by the Blood Ravens themselves. Blood Ravens have an abiding understanding of many of the dark secrets of the galaxy as a result of their ongoing quest to understand their past and the prodigious numbers of librarians seated throughout the chapter. The origins of the Blood Ravens are shrouded in mystery, and the true nature and name of their Primarch is unknown to them. A battle brother comes into the ranks of the Blood Ravens with only limited knowledge on the history of his gene seed and a sense of curiosity to understand their ancestry so that they might better understand their own abilities. This thirst for understanding the mysteries surrounding the Blood Ravens is further fueled by the principles of the chapter and the value it places on knowledge and secrets, a thirst instilled in many battle brothers by the chapter's librarians and their own quest to slowly uncover the past. In time, a Blood Raven's Space Marine's hunger to learn more of their chapter's past or uncover the darker, forbidden lore of the galaxy can lead him to recklessness and even the dangerous line between understanding and embracing the forbidden. Even though the chapter remains fiercely loyal and its commanders and most powerful librarians are well steeled against the perils of the warp and its deadly secrets, many who come into contact with the Blood Ravens see their desire to learn the hidden knowledge of their enemies and delve parts and pasts of the Imperium best left untouched as the first signs of chaos, corruption, and taint. To a Blood Raven's battle brother, though, the drive to gain knowledge can be too much, and where a more reluctant or cautious Imperial servant might leave a book unopened or a vault sealed and untouched, the battle brother must learn of its contents. Perhaps somewhere out there in the dark are the clues that will lead the chapter to better understanding its past, or even uncovering the identity of its Primarch. At the very least, a battle brother that adds new lore to the great librariums of the chapter will always be well received and honored for his diligence and his respect for the greatest of all weapons, knowledge. The Blood Ravens have existed as a fleet-based chapter since the loss of their original homeworld of Aurelia to the warp in the 40th millennium. The basis for this decision is unclear, as their millennia of stalwart service certainly qualifies the chapter for possession and control of another Imperial world. It may be that the decision was made for reasons lost to their history, which has been preserved for traditional reasons rather than functional ones. To fulfill their duties, the Blood Ravens possess several battle barges, but their great mobile fortress monastery, the Omnis Arcanum, is the largest vessel of their fleet and serves as their primary gene seed repository. This vessel also houses the chapter's Sacred Librarium Sanctorum and copies of all the knowledge the chapter has discovered during its missions across the galaxy. Each of the chapter's battle barges maintains its own librarium as well, where all of their active records and new findings are recorded. However, only a subset of the Blood Raven's complete findings, particularly information concerning the warp, archaeotech, and the ways of Xenos, are stored in these lesser librariums. Through the course of their history, companies have often been assigned to extended duty apart from the main portion of the chapter's fleet. During such missions, these independent librariums serve as interim storage of knowledge and a valuable resource for reviewing the less volatile lore that the chapter maintains. Any time that one of the auxiliary battle barges re-establishes contact with Omnis Arcanum, an exchange of information is undertaken, so any new information is returned to the Librarium Sanctorum, while new data deemed safe for dissemination is provided to the lesser battle barges. One critical limitation of a fleet-based Adeptus Astartes operation is a restriction in the availability of new candidates for initiation. The Blood Ravens overcome this difficulty by recruiting from a number of worlds, with which they have long established relations, most of which are in the subsector Aurelia of the Corianis sector. These worlds range from feral worlds, colonized by the remnants of ancient human civilizations, to hive worlds, where gangers fight daily with whatever weapons they can scrounge, living off the scrapings of imperial society. The only trait that these worlds share in common is a higher than normal frequency of psychers amongst their population. While the Blood Ravens chapter does not exclusively recruit psychers as candidates, those who show psychic talent survive their initiation rates at a much higher frequency than is observed among most other chapters. The Blood Ravens' dark secret may be that they have descended not from one of the Loyalist first founding chapters, but from the Thousand Sons Traitor Legion, as before the Thousand Sons homeworld of Prospero was destroyed by the Space Wolves during the Horus Heresy. The Xth Legion sent a portion of their forces far from their homeworld in their Legion fleet. These Astartes were not transported to the Eye of Terror under the deal their Primarch Magnus the Red made with the Chaos God Tsench to save the Legion's lives in return for their service to the Changer of Ways. This would mean that the Blood Ravens chapter is not actually a successor chapter, but is technically a remnant of one of the first founding legions, though, with a dark and tainted past. In the book Dawn of War, Ascension, it is revealed that the ancestors of the Blood Ravens built a recruiting world on top of an ancient Necron outpost, the Horus Heresy, with the help of the Eldar. The two races worked in unison, using Eldar sorcery and psychic wards to lock the Necron force lying beneath the sands in psychic stasis. The Horus Heresy Space Marines were then tasked with protecting this outpost by the Eldar to seal in the Necron threat, but they mysteriously abandoned it. It was left unrecorded in Imperial logs until the Blood Ravens rediscovered it. The Eldar mistook the Blood Ravens for being one and the same as the Heresy-era Space Marines, as they too wore similar red power armor, which was also the color of the pre-Heresy Thousand Sons Astartes power armor before their corruption by Chaos. The psychic lock the Space Marines placed on the Necrons shows that the Astartes of that time could not have already been Blood Angels, and the Thousand Sons share a bond with the Blood Ravens because both groups of Space Marines are defined by the development of unusually strong psychic powers among their battle brothers after their gene seed implantation. In the novel Battle for the Abyss, Motep, a Thousand Sons Legion psyker, whilst fighting the demon Wusoric aboard the starship Wrathful, responded to the demon's question of what did the entities of the warp have to fear from the Emperor with the response, "Knowledge is power," suggesting a connection to the Blood Ravens, PGR 396. Since the demon had been manifested in real space for so long, Motep was able to destroy its physical form and banish it back to the warp before he died of his many wounds. In the novel A Thousand Sons by Graham McNeill, a vision is seen by the remembrancer and historiographer Callista Eris, describing a future image of blood and a raven, and a remembrancer psyker attached to the Thousand Sons has a vision of the ravens, I see them too, the lost sons and a raven of blood. They cry out for salvation and knowledge, but it is denied. PGF 430. This may imply that the Blood Ravens are descended from the Thousand Sons gene seed. At the same time, one of the 4 arcane cults of Librarians that comprised the pre-heresy Thousand Sons Legion was called the Corvidae, the Latin name for ravens and crows, and whose symbol was a black raven's head, thus making it possible that the Blood Ravens were Thousand Sons Astartes who largely belonged to the Corvidae cult. Callista not only predicted the future destruction of the Thousand Sons' ancient homeworld of Prospero at the Space Wolves' hands, but she may also have described the eventual formation of the Loyalist Blood Ravens. During her final psychic episode, Callista also screamed out in anguish about the Ravens of Blood and that they were lost, crying out for their unknown father. In her death throes, she declared that they would be defined by their need to seek knowledge and artifacts of old, which is an important activity often pursued by the Blood Ravens, particularly in their search to learn more about their own origins. Since the Blood Ravens are a fleet-based chapter, it is possible that they descended from those Astartes aboard the Thousand Sons' own armada before they were forced to flee Prospero, which Magnus the Red had ordered to the far ends of the galaxy so that the Space Wolves could purge Prospero without having to face the Thousand Sons fleet. The Thousand Sons Space Marines aboard that armada were also never transported by the will of Tzeentch through the warp with Magnus and the planet-side Astartes to the planet of the Sorcerers in the Eye of Terror, as they were far beyond the edge of Thousand Sons space and were not affected by the internecine fighting. In the anthology Age of Darkness, the short story Rebirth by Chris Raitt revolves around a squad of Thousand Sons Space Marines that return to their devastated homeworld of Prospero after the sanctioned scouring of Prospero carried out by Primarch Leman Russ and his Space Wolves. After the Council of Nicaea and the rebukement of Magnus the Red, a recall order was transmitted throughout the Legion, with the bulk of the Legion being present on Prospero just before the events surrounding the fall of Prospero happened. However, some of the Thousand Sons Astartes had survived, as they had not arrived before these events occurred. This would include those Thousand Sons that had been sent away aboard their Legion's fleet elements, such as Captain Mines Calliston of the 4th Fellowship. 6 solar months after the sanctioned action against their Legion, Captain Calliston led a squad of battle brothers to the ravaged surface of their homeworld to seek for any signs of survivors or their beloved Primarch. Instead, the squadron of Thousand Sons are taken by surprise when they encounter a much larger force of World Eaters who are also on Prospero for their own nefarious reasons. In the ensuing conflagration, the majority of the squadron is killed, and their captain is captured by none other than the infamous Captain Karn of the World Eaters' 8th Assault Company and equerry to the Primarch Angron. Only Revuel Arvida, a sergeant of the 4th Fellowship and a member of the Corvidae cult, manages to survive. Like all Corvidae, Arvida is skilled in the psychic discipline of precognition and the determination of the likely probabilities of future events. Despite his bleak circumstances, Arvida knew, as only a Corvidae could know, that death would not find him on Prospero. That was no consolation for everything that had been lost, but at least it lent the task of planning his next move a certain urgency. He would survive and live to discover the true causes of his Legion's destruction and live to fight them. He would neither pause nor stumble until everything had been revealed to him, everything that would give him a weapon to employ. He is quoted as saying, "Knowledge is power," suggesting another connection to the Blood Ravens, PG 162. Ironically, the symbol of the Corvidae cult's discipline is that of a black raven's head. Arvida would in time go on to become Janus, the first Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights, and the Blood Ravens are one of the only chapters in the Imperium that the Grey Knight have allowed to know of their existence. In the novel Dawn of War, Tempest by C.S. Goto, during an incident on the world of Arcadia, a fabled library world of the elusive Harlequins, a Blood Raven's librarian named Rama suffered amnesia and fell in with the notorious sorceress Chaos Warband, the Prodigal Sons, which at that time was led by the exalted sorcerer Azek Ahriman. During his time with the Warband, Ahriman refers to the Blood Raven variously as son of Ahriman, friend of Ahriman, and as a lost brother. Further evidence shows a link between the Thousand Sons and the Blood Ravens when Rama discovers an ancient Eldar tome known as the Unfounding, which mysteriously bears the crest of the Blood Ravens upon its cover. Ahriman acknowledges that he too once owned a copy of this tome and that another one was in the possession of Azariah Vidya, chapter master of the Blood Ravens in the 37th millennium. Ahriman states, "I knew Vidya better than you might expect." He also states to Rama, "We are not so different, you and I. We were not always so different. There was a time, long ago before the change, when the Thousand Sons of Magnus wore the blood-red armor of their Primarch." Though these clues are tantalizing, there is no further explanation given as to what many of these statements exactly mean. Also, it should also be noted that Ahriman, as a follower of Tzeentch, is a master of deceit and trickery, who might have been attempting to manipulate Rama to use the Blood Ravens Librarian for his own ends all along. Since the Blood Ravens were adopted as an official chapter by Games Workshop following the introduction of the Dawn of War PC game, subtle hints have been given in a variety of sources that the Blood Ravens are actually a loyalist successor chapter of the Thousand Sons. In particular, their unnaturally high number of librarians and the chapter's central focus on the pursuit of knowledge are very similar to the characteristics that once defined the Thousand Sons before their corruption by chaos. Such a connection to a reviled traitor legion would also be a terrible dishonor and would explain why the Blood Raven's genetic heritage may have been deliberately obscured from the Imperial record by the chapter's founding generation of Astartes.